I can get that set right. This is on behalf of the Holocaust. Please listen.
But all of them had the grace to take in a Jewish child. They were not particularly warm. They did not love me. I did not love them. Nevertheless, they did, as I say, what most of us don't do, which is to burden the household, the kitchens and the bedroom and the living room with this little foreigner.
Mariam was somewhat aloof. It was her manner. She was loving, but she didn't hug and kiss me, whereas my mother was the exact opposite. She used to not just kiss me once, in fact, but she sort of kissed me, rat-tat-tat like a machine gun. But Mariam was distant and nice, and I think that's what I needed, because I had trouble really feeling that I belonged there, and to have sort of pushed me into it would have, I think, been difficult.
He didn't cry, not at all. Not at all, couldn't understand it.
This is London Calling.
Just once, they used to like to listen to some programmes on the wireless. I used to come sit on my knee, and there was something in the music. I just heard him once go, a little sob, and that was all.
I tried really to please the Cohens because, I loved them, and I felt very dependent. One of my main worries was that I would be sent away. And I know this happened to another boy, somewhat older, who was taken in by some friends of the Cohens, and he was arrogant and impossible, and eventually they simply had to send him to, some other home. And I'd heard other places where this happened. So I felt very much on edge.
Word came that my mother is no longer in London. She went back to Vienna to get my father to move, who was impassive. So I really did make up my mind I would be as tough as nails. Nothing would hurt me. I would have no emotions. And it carried me through for about 6 or 7 years. I got a scholarship to a grammar school, and people were saying to me, partly in jealousy, said, there are snobs in these schools, and they're anti-Semites, and you got to watch yourself, they're going to take it out on you. And I went to school. I had a school tie, I guess, or a blazer. I was just entering a new world. The sun was shining. And I went to school, and a fellow came up to me, and he said, "Who are you?" And I just knocked him down.
There was no doubt a cost of trying to be good all the time and keeping my anger in. Only once did it slip. One day, John and I were having breakfast, and there was some silly argument over who got the marmalade first.
And Kurt threw a knife. That was the only time he was naughty. And John had a little wound here, which was near his eye. It wasn't very nice. And Dr. Rose, who was our great friend, lived a few doors down. And he came in and he was furious. "You shouldn't have taken the child in."
It terrified the entire family, and me too. Since then, I've been somewhat afraid of my possibility of go to anger. The other signs that I had a lot inside me was that I always had some intestinal problems until I went in the army, and then I had the most terrible food and felt fine.
I have an analogy for this. When all of us have had the experience of finding a bird with a broken wing, and you pick up this bird and you hold it in your hand, and you think it's going to sit there quietly, sweetly, with its warm feathers and be darling. It's not. What it does is immediately to use its muscles, and it's a very uncomfortable thing to hold in your hand because there's this fluttering. What it wants is to get away. It may need you to hold it and to nurse it, but what it wants is to get the heck out of there. And I think that's what we were like. Certainly that's what I was like. I was not nice to have around.
So I got the new job in London, but I was working there until June 28th, 1940. It was lunchtime and I was sitting having a sandwich, but suddenly two guys appeared, two men. CID. What have I done? Nothing. You are Basha Gomorski, etc., etc. You are now under arrest. Under arrest. For what? You're an enemy alien, and please come with us.
After Germany invaded Western Europe, the British began rounding up all refugees from Germany and Austria who were over the age of 16. Although the vast majority were refugees from Nazi persecution, anyone with a foreign accent was viewed as a potential saboteur. Within a few months, the government interned approximately 30,000 men and women. Plans were made to deport as many as possible.
The good thing about life is, you remember all the good things that happened to you, and bad things, you forget about them. And in fact, you have to make an effort to really remember them. The day came when we had to go to the ship. Soldiers were standing there with bayonets mounted on their rifles, and they pushed us along. They said, "Leave your luggage over there, you'll get it later on." And they pushed us along the deck. Before you knew it, we went down the stairs, and another stairs. I was on the third deck.
Over 2,500 prisoners, twice the capacity of the ship, were crammed onto the HMT Donera, supposedly bound for Canada. 2 days out of Liverpool, the Donera was spotted by a German U-boat.
Huh. Oh, Lord.
Suddenly something hits the ship. The lights went out. This is the end of it. Everybody gravitated towards the stairway, which went to the deck above. And after about 2 minutes, you couldn't get up there because there were so many the stairs, because we were just choking. And suddenly the lights went on again. Everybody stopped in the steps and went back down. The torpedo didn't explode, but I was under the impression that the torpedo hit us sideways and it just bounced off. Our luck. Because if it would have finished, all of us would have been finished. We were traveling, going west for several days. But suddenly our outlook said something is happening. We are not going west, we are turning south. We had no idea where we were going, except it must have been Australia. We were starving daily. They were treating us like pigs.
Wow.
Being hungry every day, people were lining up on the kitchen there to get an empty pot, where the jam was in it, just to scrape it out. And having one slice of bread. The existence from one day to another was worse than the day before. We were on the ship almost completely 2 months. What happened on the Donera, years later I'm looking at it, this didn't happen to me. There must have been somebody else, because it was horrible, too horrible to describe.
From an overseas liner in Sydney Harbour, a strange contingent of new arrivals is transshipped aboard a ferry. Enemy aliens who are being interned in Australia for the duration of the war.
Before we knew it, we were off the ship. The first thing I remember is that each one of us got a box of food. That was the best meal I ever had in my life. After starving for 2 months, I opened up, there were 2 cheese sandwiches, thick like this, and a banana, and an apple, and an orange, and they're giving second helpings. It was unbelievable.
As the war progressed, reports of mass arrests and deportation of Central European Jews began to reach Britain.
In the spring of 43, the city of Berlin was cleansed of the last Jews. They came and took my family and myself along, and we were taken to a collection point, and after a couple of days we were deported to Auschwitz. Though we did not know when we got to the train, which consisted of cattle cars, where we were going. We landed in Auschwitz, and the moment we landed there, we were commanded to leave the trains, women with children to the left and men to the right. And that was then the last time that I saw my wife, my then wife and child.
Oh, my.
Laurie Kahn and her family
So
were
much
deported to
suffering.
Theresienstadt, the Czech ghetto the Nazis used to deceive the world about how humanely they treated their prisoners. In time, the population of Theresienstadt exceeded its capacity.
One day, they came into our barrack, and my name was called to report to the railroad station. And I went to the railroad station, and as they called your name, you had to go and see this SS guy, and he crossed you off the list, and then you went into the car. I got there, and I repeated my name. He said, "You're not going." I had no idea. I didn't dare ask why or what, but that was the end of it, and they sent me back. And this went on for about maybe 2 weeks. I've been at the railroad station, I think, 4 times. And I was a complete wreck. To say goodbye to your parents 1 time, a 2nd time, a 3rd time, and a 4th time, and once before when I was in the Kindertransport, was just absolutely devastating.
Oh, Lord.
And every time I said goodbye, I think I tore a little piece out of my mother and out of my father, and also a big piece out of myself. The last time it happened, I said to the guy, "Would you terribly mind, but I want to go. Are you sure of that?" I said, "Yes." Crossed my name off, and I went. And little did I know that we were going to Auschwitz.
Oh.
There was a long period where I did not hear anything from my parents. And I said, well, it's wartime, and I found all kinds of reasons and excuses. And then finally, I received a letter from my father in which he said, tomorrow I'm going to be deported to an unknown destination, and it may be a very long time before you hear from me again. And then I received a letter from my mother. She says, tomorrow I'm going to be deported from here. And she encourages me to be good and honest and courageous, and to hold my head high and to never give up hope. And this at a time when I think she knew what might be happening to her. And then there was one more communication from her, postcard dated September 4th, 1942, and it's written in real shaky handwriting, and she's saying that she's traveling to the east and is saying a very final goodbye to me. But for many, many, many years, I would see the postcard in front of me, and I would see she's saying traveling to the east, and yet I would understand that she's saying she's traveling in an easterly direction. And then I would say to myself, well, maybe she's going back to Kippenheim, and maybe that's good. And the final goodbye, I didn't understand.
That misery.
I always felt I should be grateful, and that we had been saved, and that these people had taken us in, and I should be happier there. But, facts are facts, and it wasn't a good place to be. Uncle Billy, who was not a very courageous man, every night he would go into the country, but he took us with. We went in to escape the bombs, until one day the people where we were staying, we slept all in a room there in a cottage, and the people said they don't want the German children. So we didn't go into the country anymore.
Vince whistles. Oncoming. Oncoming.
One day, the
Oncoming.
siren sounded, and what was known as the Coventry Blitz started.
Get down! Hunker down!
And when the bombs started to fall, we stayed with Auntie Vera's mother, who had a boarding house. And the whole night long, the bombs rained down, and Coventry was a very hot place to be. We were in one house, and that was bombed, and there was a big fire upstairs, and everybody rushed out. In the morning, when Auntie Vera and Uncle Billy came back and they saw one of the boarding houses without any house, just a spiral of a bedstead, they were very shocked and they thought we'd all been killed. And they rushed over to the other house, and there we were all drinking tea, as alive as anything. And that was the only time I saw Auntie Vera cry. I think relief, because I guess she had a heart, after all.
Yes, they all have names like those. This company, which I command, is almost entirely composed of German and Austrian anti-fascists. It is one of the 15 alien companies in the Pioneer Corps.
The Genera scandal and the harsh treatment of refugees began to shift public opinion in England against internment. The government started releasing internees and allowed them to join the British Armed Forces.
Those who want to go back to England, they would send back under one condition: they would join the army. I was anxious to get into this. First of all, I hated the Germans. They hated their guts. And I wanted to be part of it. Besides, what was I going to do in Australia? Sit there in Australia throughout the whole war? God forbid.
Girls, this is urgent. If you're over 17 and a half and under 19, you can volunteer for the ATS. The sooner you come, the wider the choice of jobs available. Come on, girls, it's urgent.
When I was 18, I had to do either work of importance or join the forces. And I decided to join the forces. And I also felt I was saying thank you to England for saving my life. I think as a soldier, I then felt suddenly I was in an environment where I was the same as everybody else. For the first time in my life, I think. Because I think in Lincoln, I more or less, I think I existed because I was waiting for tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. I had lots of friends and I did the things I hadn't done before. I felt like everybody else. The people on my left, the people on my right, we were all the same. And that, I think, was the first time in my life I felt that I could do everything the other people are doing.
I wanted to do something to help to finish the war. I said I wanted to go nursing. The first year I nearly gave up. I found it very difficult, but I was determined to stand it. Second year was better, and then it grew on me. And we were so busy I didn't have time to think of myself anyhow.
After about 2 years of not hearing from our parents, life sort of stretched on endlessly, but suddenly we heard that our parents had reached Spain.
Every night since I left my parents, I had prayed, please God, don't let it take longer than 5 years. And 5 years, almost to the day, we had the telegram.
The telegram said, arriving Friday, 4:45. That was all. Unfortunately, 4:45 was the train that my school friends were coming back on as well. And I knew that since the whole village also knew they were coming, they would all be at the station, and my school friends would see me and my brother and sister meeting our parents for the first time in 5 years. And it was a tremendous ordeal. And we went down to the station to wait, and I couldn't cope with it. So I went back home, and I said, I'm going home. I'm going to put the kettle on. They'll need a cup of tea. I mean, how English can you get? I waited and I waited and I waited, and it took ages. And suddenly there's my brother and sister with this middle-aged elderly couple with suitcases and bags coming up the path. And I remember rushing down to meet them, and I knew they were my parents, but it wasn't the same parents I'd left. They were much older and they were worn out, and we weren't the same children that they'd sent off. And suddenly I realised I couldn't say anything except their names, Mummy and Daddy, or Mutti and Papa. And they were just stood there, looking at each other, and it was such a traumatic moment.
It was sad for Inge because she couldn't speak German anymore. My brother spoke it with difficulty, and I was the only one who could communicate with them. But the barriers completely went, and we became a family again.
The ceasefire began yesterday to be sounded along all the fronts. The German war is therefore at an end.
I remember VE Day very clearly. It was just wonderful, wonderful. And we all danced in Piccadilly Circus. And for me, I just thought, well, this is it. Going to see my parents next week. I went straight back and wrote to both of them. Wrote separate letters because I had separate addresses through the Red Cross messages in Theresienstadt. The letters were returned to me about 3-4 months later. Took a long time. All it said on the back, deported to Auschwitz, October 44. And war was finished in May 45. That's how I found out.
As soon as war finished, Ella and I went to the Red Cross Committee and asked for them to search. Eventually we got a letter from them to say my mother had been killed in Minsk in Russia, where she was deported. It's very hard to come to terms with when you've always had that hope. And of course we've had no grave, really, no parting, no end, no funeral, no. It's that sort of vague feeling in the air of hope, and that hope suddenly fading.
I remember nursing in the children's ward, and I was always joking with the kids and laughing. And I was called to the telephone, and there was a telegram for me. I asked her would she read it, and though she read over the telephone, "Your parents were gravely ill, there was no hope. Wait for further news." And I probably didn't quite take it in. So I went back to the ward and started carried on making bets until one of the little boys said to me, "Why aren't you laughing this time?" And that's when I burst into tears and ran out. I remember going out into the garden and just lying on the lawn. I didn't want to be with anybody. It was such a shock. And suddenly the future, which we always painted, wasn't there. There was no future, there was just an emptiness.
At the time, I was liberated. A month later, I would have been 20, and I weighed 58 pounds. And that's after 8 concentration camps.
Good grief.
Many times I thought about it. What would have happened if my father wouldn't have pulled me out? I would have never ever mentioned that to my father again. You know, why did you do that? Because I think I would have done him very wrong. And I can fully understand, being a mother, what it would mean if this is what I would have had to go through with my child, God forbid. My main concern was always, let me be strong and let me try to make it. I made it that far. I want to make it to the end, regardless of what the end was.
Survival is an accident. You cannot ask a soldier who comes out of battle why were your comrades left and right killed and you survived. You have no explanation for that. It's an accident. At the moment of liberation, we were very happy, certainly, but on the other hand, really very sad, because I realized that I was one of the last who had survived, that all the others who had gone with me to Auschwitz or had been taken to Auschwitz would never return.
In July 1945, I went back to Germany to work for the American government. One of the reasons was to look for my parents. The most sensible place to go to would be to go back to Kittenheim, but I didn't go back until August 1947. I think on some level I knew my parents didn't survive, but as long as I didn't go back to Kittenheim, I could still say, well, then maybe they're back in Kittenheim, which doesn't really make a lot of sense, but I think it was just my survival mechanism. I just wasn't ready yet to accept the fact that I no longer had parents, that I hadn't had parents for a long time.
Although the vast majority of Kindertransport children lost their mothers and fathers in the Holocaust, remarkably, a few parents survived to be reunited with their children.
My parents managed to get out of Austria by going to Italy, And from Italy they got into France, and they were hidden by some extremely wonderful people there. After the war ended, I was told that my parents were alive and that someday I would probably have to go back and live with them. I think I was horrified by that idea. Uncle Percy persuaded my parents to wait until I finished the English school certificate at age 16, and also they needed time to re-establish themselves. And eventually, in 1947, they were ready for me. I didn't want to, but the Cohens took me to Paris, where I was to meet my parents. And I remember standing outside the hotel, and I saw in the distance my parents approach. And I couldn't look at them directly. So I looked at them, their reflection in the window, a shop window, as they walked towards me. And I felt a very, very strong emotion. It was a sense of elation, of love. I suddenly felt it and fought it. But I felt, I knew it was them.
We met, and Kurt's father, who was more demonstrative than the mother, put his hand through Kurt's curls, and Kurt went like that and gave him a wallop. And my husband says, "Don't you ever do that again, Kurt. Your father is showing you how, his affection." And that was that.
When it came to say goodbye to the Cohens, I realized for the first time, I think, consciously, that they had loved me, especially Percy, because he was in tears, and I'd never seen him cry before.
And then we had to leave him, and I remember him looking back, it was very, very sad. He didn't want to go, he didn't know them.
My parents let go of a 7-year-old and got back a 16-year-old. And my mother especially wanted to carry on where she'd left off. And a 16-year-old doesn't like to be treated like a 7-year-old. So when we got back to France, things were very difficult. Of course, I'm very lucky. I realize this. Whereas most of the kinder never saw their parents again, I not only had mine back, but another set of parents as well. What more could one ask for?
I ceased to be a child when I boarded the train in Prague. It's strange that it's only 6 years out of a long life, and the 6 years will affect the rest of your life.
I've never belonged when I was a child. I wanted somewhere to find roots. I feel in the latter years of my life that I've been accepted. And nobody's ever said to me, "You weren't born in this country." I was entirely accepted as everyone else. And I gradually felt I had somewhere I belonged.
To be a refugee, it's the most horrible feeling because you lose your family, you lose your home. You're also without an identity. Suddenly you're a nothing. You are just reliant on other people's good nature and help and understanding. And that's why I think living in Israel, I feel for the new immigrants. I feel for the Russians and the Ethiopians and anybody who's new, especially if they come without their families. Then, if I can do anything, I do it.
I am dazzled from the point of view of the writer. Who else has the unbelievable good fortune to live with the Jewish manufacturer, the English working class union man's railroad stoker, the milkman, the Anglo-Indian Victorian ladies, whoever has the sheer advantage of not studying this from the outside, but being a helpless member from the inside of these families. Seems to me it was a gift. Didn't seem so at the time.
I now look at my 14-year-old grandson, and I think this is the age when I lost parents, home, country. A lot has been made up to me.
Sad.
From where I lost out. I have a second cousin here. He says, anything you haven't had, you've got now. Which is so true. And I'm very grateful and very proud of the whole family.
The younger you were, the more unforgiving you are of your parents. You may say, oh, they were so brave and saved you, but they really abandoned you. We were 4 friends, very close friends. We all agreed, if it ever happens again, we will not send away our children. We will stay and die together. That's what we said. Later on, as we grew older, we mitigated it. We said, if it ever happens, we promise to take each other's children in. We will not send them to strangers.
I certainly do my share of remembering, but remembering also has to have a present and a future perspective.
Yes.
You can't just stop at remembering. I don't think I ever made a conscious decision to devote myself to human rights and social justice issues. Someone helped me. I can't pay back or thank some of the people who helped me, but I can do something for other people.
Exactly. Exactly. Hallelujah.
I've come to a conclusion about myself. In 1938, I escaped the deportation of Poland. I got out of Germany in the Kindertransport. I was sent to Australia on a ship, and the ship was torpedoed. Nothing happened. I got back to England and was in the army. Why all these coincidences? And I come to one conclusion: I was meant to survive, not because myself, but the Jews would survive, and I would bring up another generation.
Yes.
And they would live. And I look at my children.
Yes.
And my grandchildren. I know there was a purpose to my life.
May we never forget the horrors that happened during the time that the Jewish people had to struggle, that God's chosen was attacked under this great oppression. On this 75th anniversary, may we never forget the horrors that lie with war and with such evil intent. God have mercy on us all. Shalom. Thank you for listening. The Holocaust, 75 years ago. us never forget the horrors of the past. Because as we travel through this world into the future, may we never repeat the same mistakes that has occurred towards putting us where we are here today. God have mercy on us all. And those who are diverting around this anti-Semitism must realize that God's chosen people has always been under attack, way before the Holocaust, going all the way back of various tribes and cultures in Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, during the time of the beginning, in ancient historical affairs. May we always remember that God's Word must and always shall be foremost in knowing that the meek shall inherit the earth, and that to let the wheat grow with the tares until the great day of the great harvest of the second coming of Jesus Christ of Nazareth. Good luck to all of us. And once more again, shalom, and thank you for allowing for me to be able to publish this on my YouTube channel on the day of remembrance, 75 years ago, of one of the greatest horrors that has ever befallen upon this planet.